Hey, welcome to Classic Performance. We have got a great upload for you today. We're flying into Sierra Charlie 00 today for a pilot talk, and we're going to hear from Ron Strauss. Ron was Elvis's pilot of the Lisa Marie, the Convair 880, from the time that Elvis first bought the aircraft from Delta until the day he died. So let's go right inside and hear from Ron Strauss, Elvis's pilot.
I'm Ron Strauss, and I was Elvis's pilot from 75, 76, 77. I'll start off with a little bit on my aviation career. I joined the Air Force when I was 17, and I started off as an aircraft and engine mechanic on a B-47. And then I worked myself up to crew chief, and then in the mid-60s, the Air Force bought the C-141A model. And I flew that for 3.5 years. I logged damn near 3,400 hours. And I flew into Vietnam over 100 times. Then I flew the Convair 880, 880M, and 990, both as a mechanic, also as a flight engineer, also as a pilot. I ended up logging, I don't know, 25 to 30,000 hours without a violation, accident, or incident, and I'm quite proud of that record. Then Elvis bought this airplane, the Convair 880, which burned about, we figured roughly 2,000 gallons an hour. And I flew it from, it was an ex-Delta airplane, and I flew it from Wichita. After he bought it, we flew it from Wichita, Kansas to Fort Worth, Mitcham Field, and that's where we had it, or Elvis had it redone. And originally it was a passenger airplane that would carry, I think, about 100 to 120 people. And then when he got done converting it, it would only carry 29 people. So then we took off after numerous times, and I had a lot of Convair time, so I got hired by Elvis, or his father, Vernon. And Vernon always talked to Elvis every night. And then we flew it from Fort Worth to Long Beach, had some maintenance done out there. Then we ferried it to Nashville, or just south of there at Smyrna. And then we flew it back to Memphis, where then we met, we're going to meet, we thought, Elvis. Joe Esposito called us and said, "Come on out, Elvis wants to see the airplane." Well, he had never seen this completely finished yet. Although he made numerous trips down to Mitcham Field to look at it. So then three of us was in the cockpit, and we're looking out the window, and here comes Elvis. And what a shock that was. I mean, here I was going to meet Elvis Presley. And then he invited the other pilot, and then it was my turn to come out. And he introduced himself. He says, "Well, I guess you know who I am, Ron." And I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Presley." And he said, "No, none of this yes, sir stuff. It's Ron, may I call you Ron?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "I told you none of this yes, sir stuff." And that's the way it was. It was Elvis and Presley. It was Elvis and Ron from then on in. And I'll tell you a quick story on Linda Thompson. Here was she was Miss Tennessee, or runner-up Tennessee in 1972 or whatever it was. And she was a good looker, obviously. And her and Elvis would always come to the cockpit, except after a concert when Elvis was really tired. And they'd say, "Hi, how's it going?" Or they would wave to us and then leave. And I hadn't seen her in about, I don't know, a month or so. And I'm doing some paperwork, and the crew after concert came in, and they said, "Hi, gang, how's it going?" "Good." You know, and I looked around, and my mouth just dropped, because here was this, obviously a good-looking lady. She was dressed with blonde hair, with a hair in her feather, or a feather in her hair, and then American Native outfit in. And my mouth just dropped, like I said. And Elvis says, "Ron," and I won't use the word he used because there's ladies in here, but he said, "Ron, don't even think about it." And so anyway, and Linda Thompson, after they departed, before they departed the airplane, they would always come into the cockpit and kiss the engineer and then us two pilots on the cheek. And she whispered, as she kissed the flight engineer, then she kissed me. She whispered in my ear, "Don't give up, Ron, you still got a chance." Yeah, like I'm going to shoot Elvis out of the saddle. But anyway, she left. Then, you know, we were going to take Ginger Alden, that was his other girlfriend, later on, to Hawaii. So I called Joe Esposito, and I asked him, I says, "Hey, Joe, I'd like to take my wife along on this trip." And he says, "Well, I'm sorry, but you can't." And I said, "Well, why not?" And I said, "Well, you know, this airplane would only carry like 29 people. And we got 4 open seats out of Memphis, but at Oakland, where we're going to pick up fuel, we're booked. We're overbooked." And I says, "Are you sure, Joe?" He says, "I'm positive." Well, we go to Oakland to pick up fuel, and there's 4 open seats. And then to Hawaii, there's still 4 open seats. And I'm madder than hell, but I don't put on. That's it. So about halfway there, Elvis comes in the cockpit. He says, "Hey, how's it going?" I said, "Well, the weather's good. We'll be there in a couple hours. No problem." He says, "Let me tell you something." All right. He says, "Your wife, Betty, should be on this flight." I said, "Elvis, no problem. Maybe next time." "No," he says, "you don't understand." He says, "I want her out here tomorrow. First class ticket. I'm paying for everything." I thought, "No, I'm not going to do that, Elvis." He says, "Well, do I pay you enough?" "Yeah." He says, "Do you like working for me?" "Yep." He says, "If she's not out here tomorrow, I'll replace your butt." Well, I wasn't going to take the chances. So I called my wife. I says, "Pack up. You're coming out here. Elvis is paying for everything." She says, "You got to be kidding." I said, "No, first class. Go down and get your airline ticket today or tomorrow." And she was out there the next day, first class, everything. So the next day or two, I was also in charge of the maintenance. And I went and talked to his father. And I says to his father, Vernon Presley, I says, "Hey, I gave him a bunch of bills, authorized the bills to pay." And then he said, and I gave this airline ticket to him, real chivvies. And I said, "Would you mind paying for this?" And he says, "Absolutely no problem at all." He says, "I talked to Elvis last night. He said pay it." So he gave me a check. I wish I'd kept the receipt for it, but I didn't. But anyway, and then it was just like, he treated us like kings. He really did. And it was really enjoyable working for Elvis in Memphis. And we were on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that was the bad portion. But fortunately, every once in a while, I would ground the airplane, because I had the authority to ground the airplane, and do maintenance, inspection on it. Well, the flight engineer had his license, A&P license, and I also have an A&P license. And so we could work on it, not physically work that much, and the harder stuff, we just had maintenance do it. But anyway, so we went to Vernon Presley, and every about 3 or 4 months or something like that, I would ground the airplane saying that we had to have, certain maintenance ABC or whatever it was. And he said, Vernon, he says, boy, he says, you really ground that airplane a lot. Well, we quit. I didn't smoke, and I couldn't drink because you were on call. But during that time, we could, let it all hang out, have a few beers. But anyway, Vernon Presley said, geez, you really ground that airplane a lot. And I said, don't forget, there's very important people on this airplane. And he says, who's that? I says, you, Elvis, and me. He says, keep up those inspections coming. But anyway, he talked to Elvis every night. And lots of times, one time, I asked Elvis, I says, how do you like the airplane and the crew? Oh, he says, just keep up exactly what you're doing. No problem at all. 880 EP. That was the official call sign. Lots of time we just called it Hound Dog 1. It was just a hoot flying for Elvis. Everything you wanted, you got. I mean, it just was unbelievable. Nice. He was generous to us. Now, generous is unbelievable. The tips he gave us was, and this was in 1975 or 76, 77, right up until he died. It was $1,000 at a time. Sometimes he would just, for the hell of it, give us $1,000 a piece. And it was just unreal how nice he was on tips. And I lived currently at a townhouse with my family, and I wanted to buy a house. So I went to Vernon and talked to him on different things. And then I wanted him to sort of call somebody, the bank, because I wanted to buy a house. And he said, well, just go down to this bank, whatever it is, I can't remember now, and tell them who you are, who you work for. And I said, I wanted him to really call the bank and sort of grease the skids a little bit, but he didn't. So I went down to the bank a couple days later, and I walked in and I said, say, I'd like to see the president. And he says, well, what do you want to see the president about? And I said, well, money. I'd like to borrow some money for the house. And he said, no, Mary Lou over here does that. And I says, well, would you tell the president of the bank that Ron Strauss is here, the pilot for Elvis? And he said, oh, wait a minute. And then he walked into the president. The president says, come on in here, Ron, come on in here. So we talked a couple minutes, and then he says, well, I guess you want to borrow some money for a house. I says, yep, sure do. And he says, well, what kind of collateral do you have? I said, none. He says, what kind of interest do you want to pay? I said, as little as possible. And he says, well, when do you want the money? I says, in a couple days. And he said, well, he threw this thing to me. And he says, sign that. And I says, I looked at it, and it was first party to second party and all that stuff, legal stuff. And there's not any lawyers in here, is there? But anyway, so I threw it right back at him. I said, I'm not going to sign that. It's like signing a blank check. He says, Ron, Elvis has got $1 million checking account with me. And he says, a whole lot more in the bank. And I turned around and I signed it. In about 3 days, he called me up and he says, come up, pick up your check. And I says, okay. So I came up to the bank and there it was. I think it was like $75,000 or whatever it was back then. And he had the check. No, very little interest. It was like 2.5%, 3% or whatever it was. No collateral, no nothing down. And I walked out with a check and bought that house. I mean, just it was a hoot working for him. It's just no problem at all. we got anything that we wanted in Memphis. All the time he owned this airplane, I flew it right until 2 flights after he died. I went to pick up Priscilla, then flew it back, and then flew her back to after the funeral, and then back, and that's the last time I flew it. Well, you know, he at every concert, live concert, he gave out scarves. He would, you know, wipe them and then throw them to these ladies. They were crazy. I mean, really. We'd go out to the airplane at 2 or 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, normally, or not normally, and we would sit there, and then at sunrise, if Elvis didn't show, we would leave, go back in. And this happened numerous times. But one time, you know, I got caught sleeping in his bed. Because when I got done with all my pre-flight, doing the paperwork, etc., I looked around, and the other pilot, the flight engineer, and the flight attendant all had their places to sleep. And they went to sleep. And then, so the only thing left was Elvis's bed. So I took off my boots and jumped and pulled the covers over my head. Well, security always would show before Elvis showed. And it was just, so Dick Grobe, this head of security, he came out early and he found me sleeping in Elvis's bed. What the hell are you doing sleeping? And I said, well, I was sleeping until you rudely awakened me. And he says, you better get your, I won't use the word he used, but tail up in the cockpit. And then he evidently told Elvis about the problem. And where we were going, Elvis came back in the cockpit and he says, hey, thanks, we really enjoyed that. And he says, hey, Ron, I understand you got in a little trouble. I said, yeah, Elvis. I says, I got caught sleeping in your bed. He says, you can sleep in my bed anytime you want. And that's the kind of guy he was. And, you know, we went from Omaha to Lincoln. We taxied in, and I opened the window, and I had the American flag and waved it out the window. And they all liked that. And then my brother, older brother, one of my older brothers, flew with me to Lincoln. And then from Lincoln, we went to Grand Rapids. And one of the security guards came up and said, hey, Elvis has never seen Mount Rushmore. Can we circle over that? And I said, well, wait a minute, let's talk to ATC and see if we can. And so got on the phone, the radio, and said, hey, Elvis wants to see the Mount Rushmore. Can we do that? He says, you can make as many circles as you want. He says, when you get done, just give us a call and we'll get you back into Rapid City. And so we made 3 left turns around Mount Rushmore. And then we made 3 right turns of Mount Rushmore. And then we told them, come on back, no problem. And ATC victored us back to Rapid City. But what a hoot, I mean. Well, the engineer and I pre-flighted the airplane every day. And then, so at 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock, probably less than 30 minutes, we'd be airborne. After Elvis showed. I mean, we left Memphis, just for the hell of it, going to Denver. Well, it was Lisa Marie's 7th, 8th, 9th birthday or whatever it was. So we had a birthday cake. And we landed in Denver, and then this guy pulls up. He had big peanut butter jelly bacon sandwiches. They were about that big. They were $28 a piece, and we all had to have a piece of that. And I got one, and I could only eat a couple bites. It was too rich for me. And so then anyway, we had Lisa Marie's birthday, and I guess, you know, we sang her happy birthday, and I guess you know who the lead singer was in that. But anyway, then the weather was 0-0 in Las Vegas, or Long Beach, and that's where we were going to take Lisa Marie. And then we invited Elvis up to the cockpit, because earlier he told us, don't let anybody, if you're unhappy with the flying ability of this airplane, don't let anybody talk you into doing that. He says, I can get some other airplane. So no problem. So anyway, then we, like I said, we invited Elvis to the cockpit, and we told him, said, hey, Elvis, the weather's 0-0 in the whole area, in the Los Angeles area, and we're not going to get in. And diverting with you on this airplane is a real pain in the butt. And he says, well, let me just see. Let me go back and talk to these people. Then he came back and he says, hey, Dick Grove is going to take Lisa Marie to the hotel, and then when the weather gets better, we'll go back. He'll take her on into L.A. area. And then we thought, well, we'll go right back to Memphis. And then Elvis says, well, wait a minute. So we went back and talked to a few of the people. They wanted to go to Baton Rouge or someplace, New Orleans or someplace in L.A. or Louisiana. So he came back and he says, take us to wherever it was, New Orleans. And we said, okay. Well, Elvis sometimes would be in the jump seat. And he was in there in a jumpsuit, to watch our landing. Well, we got there just at daybreak. And Elvis, after we landed, I didn't know where in the hell to get fuel. So we called the tower and said, hey, where do we get fuel at? He says, well, try that Texaco or Mobil or whatever it was back then, I don't know. And so we taxied in there. Here comes this manager. And in the meantime, Elvis was sat in the jump seat on landing, and then he got behind. And this young manager, probably 30 years old, he came up, well, what do you guys want? He didn't even see Elvis. And so I says, well, we need about fuel. And he says, well, how much fuel do you want? I says, oh, about 5,000 gallons will do enough. And he says, well, who in the hell is going to pay for that? I said, that guy right back there. And he looked, my God, he says, my wife's in love with Elvis, with you. And so he said to the gal, or to Elvis, he says, hey, if I can wake up my wife, can she meet you? Oh, he says, yeah, no problem at all. So, ooh. So we were dragging our feet. And we told the manager, hey, look, you better hustle, because now you can imagine what would happen. But anyway, this good-looking lady, and she was good-looking, called, or you get this call from your husband saying, hey, look, Elvis is here. Can you imagine what she did? Now, do you put on your makeup or not? Well, she decided, I guess, to put up the makeup, because a security guard came up and said, hey, Elvis is really getting impatient. What's the problem with the airplane? Well, none, but you know, it just takes time, that's all. And off we went. Well, as we taxied out, here was this good-looking lady, and she stopped. Hey, stop. Well, hell, we can't stop. And so we're taxiing out, and we left. So that was a story. Go ahead. We were flying from Rapid City to Memphis, and we were crossing Iowa, and there was a bunch of thunderstorms. And so we invited Elvis up to the cockpit, and we said, hey, Elvis, this is going to be really rough. Do you want us to wait until morning or thereabouts? And he says, well, that radar's working, isn't it? And I said, yeah, it is, but it's old and it's antiquated. And he said, well, what do you guys want to do? And said, we'll go fly it, no problem. And so we did. And it was, but we told Elvis, it's going to be bumpy, so you better strap in. And so, and we took off, and there was all kinds of weather, and it was bumpier than heck. And then we dodged all the weather, and we got into Memphis, and Elvis came in the cockpit, and he says, "Damn, that was pretty bumpy." And we said, "Yeah, it was, and we told you that." And he said, he says, "Isn't that radar working?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, I told him, but I said, it's antiquated as can be. And he says, "Well, just talk to Daddy tomorrow and tell him you want a new radar." And that's what we did. I built had it built, so we only grounded the airplane for 3 days, had it installed with a brand new radar, and it worked perfect. No problem. Go ahead.
What was it, Portland, Maine or something like that?
We were supposed to go to Portland, Maine. I was at the mansion when Vernon Presley, and he wasn't in the best of health. He wasn't in the best of health. And so I asked Elvis, earlier, say, do you mind if we drive some of these go-karts? Because he had some real wicked go-karts, let me tell you. And so we were just racing all over the place at the mansion. And then I knew I had to get some sleep because, we were leaving that night for Portland, Maine. And I had to go home and get some sleep. But I saw Vernon Presley walking in, and he had Nancy with him, helping him, escort him into the mansion. Well, when I got home, my daughter met me at the door. She's crying. "What the hell are you crying about?" "Elvis died, Elvis died." And I said, no, it was his father. Well, I was wrong. I flew the airplane twice after he died, well, 4 times, to Long Beach, pick up Priscilla and take her back. And then that was it. I went back with the airlines. And I'll tell you, Vernon Presley, he offered to pay me after Elvis died. It was a couple weeks. And I told him, I said, no, I'm going back with the airlines because seniority means everything. And he says, no, he says, I'll pay you. And I says, Vernon, or Mr. Presley, if you send me that check, I'll tear it up because I'm going back with the airlines. And I did. So the Lisa Marie is right next to the Hound Dog 2, which is on display in Memphis. And it'll never fly again because they cut the wings and the tail off it, and then they weld them back together. And once you do that, the airplane's grounded. About, 8 or 10 years ago, I took all my family to visit the airplane. And so we did. And I says, I was the pilot of this, Ron Strauss. And he says, we know who you are, but you're going to have to pay. So I had to pay for all the kids, grandkids, and everything. So, I got this. I give these talks, and I talk to anyone, and I says, "Hey, do you have pictures of the Corvette in the funeral procession?" And they said, "No." Well, I drove it to the mansion for his first burial in whatever cemetery that was, and then Vernon decided that vandalism would take pieces of Elvis's body and just sell them or whatever, display them. So anyway, I drove it to the mansion and parked it, and we were all supposed to drive ride in the limos. Well, the highway patrol, and there was tens of thousands of people lined up on Elvis Presley Boulevard. It was unbelievable. And then, so the highway patrol came up to me, or asked somebody, says, "Who owns that yellow vet?" And they pointed at me. "Well, hell, I ain't done nothing." So the guy came up, and he says, "You own that yellow vet?" I says, "Yes, I do." He says, "Would you mind driving it in the funeral procession?" And I said, no, but why? And he said, well, we don't know what this crowd's going to do. So you're going to be the very last car in the funeral procession, and so we can identify it. Fine with me. So my wife gets in the car, and we drive it to the funeral procession. Very last car. And I got the flowers that my wife picked up. So when we got into the funeral procession and drove to the first place that we buried him at, my wife says, you know, I'm going to get the flowers off his coffin. I says, don't you dare. Well, she did anyway. So we drove back, and this cop car was behind me. And the cop car turned on his siren and his lights. And so I followed him because we were all supposed to go back to the mansion. That's where I thought we were going. And we're going 70, 80, 90 mile an hour down Memphis Boulevard or whatever. And they had blocked all the streets with motorcycles and that. And so my wife said, Ron, I don't think we should be here. I said, why not? She says, when you get time, look in your rearview mirror. There's nobody behind you. I looked, and there isn't. So then we missed the turnoff to the mansion. And then I knew. It was too late, though. What the hell? So we followed the cop car, and we went to the airport. And this guy jumps out with a security guard and gets on the airplane, and they taxi out, take off. And so I asked the Memphis Aero people, I said, who in the hell was that? That was the governor of Tennessee. So then that's when my wife, we went on the airplane, and she took off one of the jumpsuits, and she says, this is in memory, you know, of Elvis. And I said, put that back, because I don't know, back then it would cost, I don't know. And today it would be unreal what money would be worth. So then she went back and she picked up this comb, which I got, and it was used by Elvis, because she got it back there in the back. Now the teeth are missing, some of them are missing, and I don't know back then what happened, so I just really don't know. Any other questions? You're welcome to come up and look at these books and the jackets and whatever. Good.